Thank you. 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. Yep. Okay, thank you. If you guys could keep your eyes on your own paper, though, please, that'd be good. Work on your own. Don't talk to your neighbor, please. Yeah. Great question, but we don't really have time for that right now. We've got to kind of focus on the task at hand. I don't know how many of you have heard things like that in your educational careers, but I have a confession to make. As an educator, I've said a lot of those kinds of things. My name is Will Pinner, and I'm here to talk to you about soft skills becoming critical. When I was a kid, I had all kinds of allergies. I was allergic to everything outside. Cats, dogs, grass, trees. If it was outside, I was allergic to it. But I went to an allergist who was on the top of his game. So I thought, this is going to be great. I mean, he was on the nightly news most nights about being such an expert. But at one time, he said, our field of study is really about where general medicine was back when they were still cutting people and bleeding them with leeches and stuff like that. He said, that's kind of where we are in what we know about the evolution of that particular field at that time. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm really grateful that the field of medicine has evolved beyond just bleeding and, trying to get the bad stuff out. And because they know more about the human body. And so now that we know better, we do better. Well, as a doctor of education, I would like to tell you that in the field of education, we try to also advance the field. I got a confession to make that we're not quite as good at it. And part of that is because we have some underlying assumptions that sometimes get in the way. Now, we'll go to a professional learning experience and we'll listen to the speakers and we'll hear about the data and we'll then take that under advisement and then go back to our rooms and shut the door and continue to teach the way we've always taught, a lot of us, partly because, it's worked for us before. And partly because, it's just, maybe it's hard for us to change. In fact, some of us are so adverse to change, it reminds me a little bit of infants who, seem to be fine, even though they got a dirty diaper and they don't scream until you change it. It was smelly and gross, but at least it was warm and it was mine, right? And so there is this aversion to change, and it's not always because we're just antithetical to it. Sometimes it is because of the assumptions we bring to the table. Now, there are a lot of assumptions about what the purpose of education is, but one that permeates the DNA of practically every educator I know is that at least a portion of our purpose is to prepare students for the workforce, to have a good career, right? There's this send them off to college or send them off ready for a career and then their lives will be better. Well, it's interesting to think about that because we don't really have any idea what kind of a workforce it's going to be when the kids who are in front of us actually enter it. One of the favorite places that my family and I, when my wife and I had our kids still at home, we had 5 children, and we very often would go to vacation at Colonial Williamsburg. It's a wonderful little village in Virginia that represents the colonial time frame, right? So you've got people there who among other things, recreate experiences from that time frame, and then also who are still artisans and craftsmen doing things the way they'd been doing it back in the 1700s. One of my favorite ones to watch were the wagon wheel folks. That just fascinated me. I'm not sure why. But that was 7,000 years ago, people were making wagon wheels. And so, and the design has changed over time and gotten better and better. And so these folks had learned the collective wisdom of 7,000 years worth of artisans and craftsmen to get skilled at their craft. And that was in the 1700s, but in the 1900s, something happened, right? In fact, around 1925, we still had more horses than cars in the United States, but by 1930, it had flip-flopped. And so a few years later, it didn't matter. You could be at the top of your game as a wagon wheel maker, but you were obsolete at that point. So nobody could have necessarily predicted that earlier on. Now, that's one kind of example. We have thousands of examples that we could think about whose positions are obsolete now, but we also have lots and lots of experiences that weren't around 10 years ago. I would have not predicted that we had career fields of esports coaches or drone operators, right? Or, a variety of things like that. In fact, I was thinking about how if my oldest kids, who are 34 and 32 now, if Devin and Austin could Bill and Ted themselves back to their teenage selves and talk to them about what they saw now, they'd have some really good retorts for me when I'm like, hey guys, get off the video games and go do something productive. They'd be like, hey, we're getting ready for our careers, you know? In fact, we're going to be making more money than you are, Dr. Bennett, right? So the truth is, if that's our focus, is preparing people for college, then we're missing the mark because we don't know what it's going to be like. And in fact, if we get to teach the way we've always taught with the stuff that we've always taught them, they're going to be woefully inadequately prepared. Now, that's one of the assumptions we bring. But another one of the assumptions that's underlying that then is if that's how we're going to prepare, what they're going to prepare them for, how do we prepare them? And so when I was a little kid, I remember some of the older folks in my circle of influence who would talk about the 3 R's, you know? You remember those? Reading, writing, arithmetic. That's what they said, right? These are the fundamentals of education. It didn't play out quite like that in my elementary school, but it was the core ELA, math, science, social studies, right? Those were the core fabric of our existence. But you know, we've had decades to learn from since then. We know more about how the brain functions. We know more about how cross-cutting concepts are important in interdisciplinary thinking. And we have 4 core subjects in most schools, right? English language arts, math, science, and social studies. And so fine arts and career technical education, physical activity, all that stuff's relegated to kind of an ancillary role. But even scarier than that is mental health, social skills, emotional regulation, creativity, passion, ingenuity. Those are the kinds of things that aren't in the curriculum at all. They're not in the standards, right? So as we're getting people ready for college and career readiness, are we? You know, if college and career readiness is a focus of education, maybe it's a good idea for us to find out from those who are experts in that field, leaders in that field, what they think of the products that we're producing. Well, we've done that. K-12 folks have asked military leaders, college professors, industry professionals, all right, how are we doing in terms of having people who are ready when they graduate from high school, ready for your next step? And they say, well, you're producing really smart people who do really good stuff. And when we tell them to do something, they know how to accomplish it. And they work independently pretty well. We're like, all right, feels pretty good. But wait, there's more. But if the problem isn't pretty easy to solve, they have difficulty sticking with it. If they run into difficulties interpersonally, they have a tough time managing their emotions as adults. And they don't always work well together in a collaborative kind of a way. So we'd really like for you to work on that. Okay. So what we've done basically is we've created people who are good answer getters who keep their eyes on their own paper and do their own work, right? That doesn't get me up in the morning. I'm a principal of a middle school now, and one of the things that, I sometimes wrestle with is just getting up in the morning and going to work, because sometimes there's this emphasis on you got to get those test scores up. Friends, I got to tell you, that doesn't get me up on those rough days, though. But what does get me up is thinking, you know what? If we put in the right kind of effort to help kids build their emotional resilience, build their social skills, build their grit and resiliency, now we're not just making better entrepreneurs, better employees, but we might be creating better spouses, better parents, better citizens, better neighbors, better friends. That gets me up on those rough days. Now, the difficulty around that is what we measure is what we tend to focus on. So I'm going to ask that we do 3 things. Number 1, that we help champion these kinds of things that we've historically called soft skills. By the way, soft, creativity, ingenuity, collaborative work, emotional regulation. We used to think that those are the kinds of things that are going to be picked up at home or at churches or in sporting clubs or scouts or things like that. First of all, these are not soft skills. These are the very essence of what it means to be a human being. And we can no longer presume that they're going to be just picked up along the way. And so we have to have collective responsibility for doing it. So we want to champion making sure that these are at the forefront, not ancillarily related to our education, and not just in the K-12 environment, and not just in the collegiate environment. but in our neighborhoods, in our families, in our communities. And second, that we make it a collective responsibility piece, that we don't relegate it to somebody else's idea. And then third, that we help develop some metrics so that we measure how effective we are at this. Because otherwise, here's what's going to happen. This is what happens in my industry, is we go, yes, social skills are really important, and we're glad that you're doing that because we can tie that to better test scores. But that's not the why. The why should be because we want people who can work together better, right? Resiliency is great because, then it pushes through and then we've got a better win-loss record on the field. No, resiliency is great because it teaches lifelong habits that are important when you hit those really tough times, when a loved one dies, when things aren't going, when your company goes bankrupt. Those are the kinds of skills we need to be creating. And if we do that, then we have the opportunity not just to raise our test scores to make ourselves feel a little better. Okay, they get into a better college, get a better job, make a little more money. But no, we make a more just world. We make a place where our students, our young people, can blossom and become the people that they were created to be. I think if I'd have given this talk 10 years ago, I would have encouraged you and said, these skills, these soft skills are they're not soft skills. They're critical. They're crucial. They're just as important as reading and writing and counting. But today, I'm not going to say that. Today, I'm going to tell you, I think they're more important. They're more important because they're the very essence of what it means to be human. They're more important because without those skills, it doesn't matter how smart you are. In fact, I don't know that we want to create a bunch of really smart people who don't know how to get along with each other. I think we see some of that in our culture. The more polarized we become, the more we need to be able to listen to one another, communicate well with one another, to be able to pass along ideas and not immediately jump to judgment. The time is now for that. If you think about the way AI is changing things, we don't need any more answer getters who keep their eyes on their own paper. We need people who can ask really good, thoughtful questions, who can work together, who can challenge the results, challenge the status quo in a productive way. That could change the world. And the time is now. Julius Caesar, in the tragedy of Julius Caesar, William Shakespeare wrote a really great line for Marcus Brutus when he was trying to encourage them that right now is the time for us to go into battle. He said, there's a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Omitted, and all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries. The time is now, and our kids deserve an opportunity for us to help them stay out of the shallows and instead ride that wave to their fortune. Thank you.